Thanks, Mike. Okay, that's great. Okay, I'll just begin up with the questionnaire. Uh, can you give us some background of the typical customer work responsibilities, especially when a requisition or probably a quote managers?
Sorry, I didn't understand the first part of that. The what
Okay.
responsibilities?
Uh,
Yeah,
like
Robert, what we're trying to identify here is, according to you, what is a typical structure of, say, quote managers or technical team
I see.
on the
I
customer
see.
side? And according to you, how do they manage? Is it one person, two person? How is the whole?
Got it. Got it. So, and so far I've had exposure to basically two customers, Dell and VMware primarily, in terms of their intended use of the platform, and they both use them in a very different way. So for Dell, they have separate teams doing separate functions. So the requisition piece is initiated by a location engineer or project manager, someone responsible for the what services need to be installed and ultimately put in place. And in Dell's world, they put in the initial request, and once the quotes are back, the quote manager will need to coordinate with them, because they actually make the final call, the decision on which vendor to go with, which quote that was responded to they want to award. And that seems to be different than other customers we've seen. But in any case, that's the individual that will initiate the requisition from the procurement module, and go up to the point where they create the quote, or just pushing the button that says create quote. That's the handoff to, in the Dell world, the quote manager. Now the quote managers are part of a team, so it's not a single individual. It's a group of maybe a half dozen people in the US and maybe about the same number globally or more. And they're responsible for taking the requisition or the quote from the requisition, making any updates to it based on their understanding of what's required. They might go back and talk to that engineer to get more information or trade emails. But basically, they're going to add any of the options that may need to be requested. They're going to update the vendor details in terms of which vendors they're going to send the quote to. And then they'll ultimately send that through the portal to the vendors and coordinate with them once they get their responses. So the quote gets sent over to the vendors will respond, and that comes back to the quote manager to review and award a quote. But again, as I said, in the case of Dell, they're going back to that engineer and they're asking, okay, I got this information back. This one said $100, this one said $300, but they can install it in 2 weeks instead of 3 weeks. Who do you want to go with?
Right.
Whatever the criteria might be, and the engineer will tell them what they should do.
Right.
Right now, the way our system's designed, it doesn't allow for that visibility to the engineer about anything that came back from the quote, because they only see the requisition. They don't see the actual quote information today. And that's one of the requests that we've had from Dell, is to be able to at least share that information so they can view it, and ideally for them to be able to actually award the quote in some way. Now, once the quote is awarded, it is the quote manager's responsibility to actually take it to the next step, to create the request. So they'll push a button to create request, and that moves it into the provisioning and approval process.
Okay. Okay.
And then I'm not going to get into that process unless we need to, but that's already set in terms of how things proceed. But it is important to know that the approvers and the provisioners downstream need to see certain information about the quote, right? They need to see the cost that came across. They want to know that a quote was processed and who it was processed with. So I'm not sure that we're showing all the information on the provisioning side that they need or want to see, and that's something we probably want to look at with all of this at some point.
Okay.
Okay.
So
Was that good, or was that too summarized?
no, that was good. That was very detailed. Thank you so much. So, so what we understand is this particular module, the end of it, especially uh, to start with, there's this technical person or a network person who's involved who generates the requirement. And then there's a typical procurement guy who's mainly looking into quotes, dealing with vendors, costing and things. And finally, once it comes back, then there are what we understand multiple parties who need to finalize, decide, and then the code gets kind of approved. And what can be built or what is required by certain customers is for everyone to probably see and approve and probably communicate on the application itself throughout through these models, and then communicate to each other that okay, we are fine with this particular cost or entity, and then go ahead and finalize. So this part is not there, we believe, currently, right?
Right. So yeah, so the responses come back, and it's designed really nicely for the quote manager to see that information and to compare the different responses and make a decision. But again, in Dell's world, they want that engineer to be able to just at least see that information. So at the very least, if we had a report to share that showed the comparison in a useful way, or if we could send a notification saying this is ready for your review, and then they had a view only access into that comparison area, that would probably be the ideal, especially if they're able to input comments. I think it's probably okay, and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, for the Dell quote manager to still be the one that pushes the button that says award, even though from a decision standpoint, it's the engineer. But the engineer, the reason that they're not involved in the quote management process is that's a whole bunch of administrative stuff and time that they're not going to have time to deal with anyway, that they're not going to have the visibility, which also means they're not going to have the experience using the portal enough, in my opinion, to be effective at clicking that award button and knowing what happens next. Getting the requisition in, that makes sense to them, but the whole quote management administration piece, that would just be noise. So I think we want to make it as simple as possible, give them the visibility, allow them to communicate with the quote manager through the portal, and be able to record and log that communication, which is the important parts. Otherwise, they're just going to have a phone call or an email outside the system, have a discussion, make a decision, and none of that communication would be in the portal. And I think we lose an opportunity if that happens to have something valuable from a history standpoint in the portal.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes, totally. So yeah, that completely makes sense because that completes this end-to-end circle of the entire requirement generation to its processing to approval, and all
Right.
parties are involved.
Because then you
They
know
can
not only what decision was made, but why.
why, yeah. So if a network person is not okay with a particular input, they can say that and they can communicate that in the system, or they can approve. And yeah, and there will be better documentation and tracking probably.
Right.
So yeah, so that's really helpful. Uh, so did you again ever was there an instance where you came across some of these engineers or procurement managers who probably handle it end to end, who would probably
Yes.
get requirements offline and then generate the entire
Yes,
request.
and in fact, after we did the initial training, a lot of the engineers were either not included in the training, somewhat by accident on Dell's part, or hadn't really been set up correctly yet. So the
Mm,
quote managers actually did the end-to-end process in the system for a while in the very beginning, and they were getting the information via email from the engineers.
mm,
So once the system kind of caught up with the correct configuration based on our original build, we were able to get the engineers then trained, and they're starting to use it. It
mm,
probably would have ramped up quite a bit if it wasn't for this whole COVID-19 business,
right.
um, but I am seeing engineers in there actively creating requisitions. Not a lot of them, but there are some.
Mm,
And they have a relationship, I think, with the quote managers already, so they know each other, so they're able to um, assist each other in the process. Now for VMware, it is pretty much all one person or one group that's doing the end-to-end process.
okay.
And I think if you find a smaller company, you're going to see that more
Yeah.
often.
Yes. Correct.
The larger enterprises, there could actually be another role in here in the middle. The way we design the system, and I'm not sure it's going to be used this way or not, but the intention was the engineer would create the requisition. They
Mm,
wouldn't hit the button to create quote. It would go to another role, which would be a requisition validation person, a validator.
right.
And that would be like a single administrative person that would take, let's just say, all the engineer requisitions and basically assess those, validate the information, and they would be the ones hitting create quote, assigning the quote manager during that process, and kind of the gatekeeper of that process. That's the way I think Sudhir had envisioned it when he
Mm,
had started building it out. But I'm not sure if we had any specific customer um, feedback that said they wanted that or not. So I don't know if Mike or others have that information, but that's how it was designed. So it's possible to have that additional role in the middle.
mm,
Um,
right.
I think it's useful at least to have someone that has that ability. If nothing else, if if the engineers are having difficulty figuring out how to get the requisition from being created to sent to the quote managers, it's good to have one person that's knowledgeable and able to assist both parties in making that work.
Mm, yes, I think that would really help. So from what we understand, especially from the case from VMware, is probably a requirement where the process could be much more linear for certain managers or certain people there who are doing it end to end. So it would
Yeah.
be helpful for them to start from a requisition and just handle it in 3 to 4 or 5 steps and complete the code and probably
Yeah, I think,
differentiate requisitions.
yeah, if you have a scenario like VMware where it's one person that's taking the full cycle or end-to-end
Mm,
cycle, right now, the way it's set up, some of the steps very likely feel redundant
yeah.
and excessive. So there's definitely more clicks than they should have to do to get it
Mm,
from a requisition to a quote
yeah.
from their point of view, because there's no handoff really,
Mhm.
but the system is forcing a handoff,
Right. Right.
and that's not going to make sense to them. So
Yes.
that's kind of the
So,
challenge with that.
yeah.
But it also assumes, and I didn't mention this before, is we've made the assumption in our design that when you create the requisition, that in addition to deciding which quote manager to send it to, you're also deciding, am I creating a quote or not? Am I just sending this on to order, right?
Right. Right.
Dell's
Right.
policy is all requests will follow the quote process. So
Mm,
even though that option is there, it may never get used by Dell. Whereas another customer, and this is why you would want that gatekeeper, that validation person, someone that can decide this needs to go to quote, or no, we already know the vendor, we already know the contract, we can just send this to an order. We don't need to slow the process down. I'm going to send it right to order. So that would be a very important reason for that role if you have that type of process.
That's correct. That's correct. So yeah, so understood that probably the experience or the flow should be such that it could meet the needs of, say, a super admin or a lead who can handle it end to end, who can either probably place a requisition or send it as an order or finally go and create a code. But then other roles would have restricted access or restricted kind of workflows. But the entire experience can be slightly more intuitive and a little bit more linear, where everything can.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Currently, we felt that it was a little bit more to and fro and various locations where they have to move from procurement to court, especially when they're working end to end. So yeah, so that's good input. Thank you. Uh, so considering they go hand in hand, we that was our next question. We probably got answer to that. So uh, when are the what do you think are the scenarios when they typically generate requisitions or they work on code? Is it mostly one or two categories of services or most of them? Uh, are they mainly looking at few categories according to you, say intranets or VPN or certain, or it's a wide range of services they cater to?
Well, I want to be careful answering that because I've had a pretty limited view of
Okay,
actual customer experience, right?
okay.
My sense, though, in being on meetings and talking with them, is that for Dell right now, the majority of the requests for quote are actually changes in service,
Hmm.
upgrades or downgrades of existing, um,
Setup. Okay.
uh, SD-WAN locations. Usually it's internet, it seems, but
Okay.
certainly it could be any range of services. The
Okay.
challenge right now, of course, is our system is only set up for, in terms of quote, requesting new service at a
Okay.
location. So already we're dealing with a workaround where they use the new service for a change, but in the end you can't push that to an order automatically. You have to then manually go in and create an order for the change on an actual change request order after the quote's been completed. So that means right now those quotes are sitting um, in a status of close the vendor, but have never had a quote a request created. There's no link to a request, so we don't really know the full life cycle of that from looking at that order. So definitely one of the priorities would be getting a change request type um, requisition in place um,
Hmm.
to enable capturing that, because according to Dell, that's probably 60 or 70% of their requests right now. Now, if
Right.
they're going through a migration of some sort or moves, then you might see a lot more ad activity of new locations or new services. So it's going
Right.
to be very business dependent, and you know, whatever we say is the normal today, the most typical today, might be different in 3 to 6 months.
Right. Right. Okay. Thanks for that. So when probably according to you as well as using this application uh, throughout as well as feedback from others, they are constantly tracking codes, they are managing, they are analyzing data. So did you feel or did probably you get a feedback that they were having certain issues in filtering the data or probably gathering information? We have a certain set of filters there, but I'm not sure that's been used quite extensively. So did you come across any instance where it was complex to actually scan and filter and manage those codes? especially in the home screen, where the landing screen with the grid.
Yeah, I'll say the home screen for quote is not very intuitive about, um,
Mm,
it doesn't work well as a queue for the user.
mm,
When you go in, you want to see what's open and what's pending as a quote. You
mm,
want to very easily be able to toggle to see, what do I own? What do others on the team own?
mm,
A lot of them cover each other
right.
for when someone's out of office. So they're a fairly small team. So I'm not sure that we need to have really strong restrictions in there to prevent others from working on different quotes. But they certainly want the ability to focus on their own quotes easily. And right now
Mm,
they have to filter by their name. So if there was a button to simply toggle view my quotes, view all quotes, or to also say view open, by status, having to quickly be able to quickly and easily toggle the and filter the status.
right.
Um, I honestly don't know. I haven't been on enough of the calls to say exactly what fields should or shouldn't be added. I don't have
Yeah.
a good sense of that. Um,
Right.
in terms of updating and reviewing information, I do think that there has been an ask for the ability to upload or download um, information. So
Mm,
to in particular, to be able to download the response information in a way to view that.
right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because we felt there could be instances where they would want to filter by certain categories, services, or some technical parameters like bandwidth or some connectivity speed, and they would like to see those codes especially, which needs to be more intuitive for them to filter
Yeah, I
through
think we
identify.
certainly need to focus in on what is it they really need to see
Yeah,
and when and why. And I really don't have a good sense of that.
sure,
So I don't want to put you down a path on that.
sure.
That we want to hear from actual customers on.
Okay, sure, no problem. Uh, so there is a module, or there is probably this code tracking functionality where users basically add the dates or milestones and things like that. They add those things. We kind of got a sense that it's not so extensively utilized or used, unless there are certain dates where they need to submit a quote at a particular time, or they need to close this. So what is your view or opinion on this? How extensively would that be used actually? This is on the home screen, on the quote side.
Yeah, yeah, I'm it's on the summary for quote tracking.
Yeah.
I know Dell uses the only thing they seem to be looking at are the actuals,
Hmm.
right? When you're creating a tracking or milestone tracking kind of dashboard, um, you're kind of stuck with needing to be able to do everything
Hmm.
or not do it at all. Because if I'm project managing something, I'm going to have one place I want to go for my tracking,
Hmm. Right.
right? So the only thing I can track in here is this particular quote and this
Right.
particular master quote ID. So if this were me, I would want a dashboard where I had milestones on all my master and child quotes in one view,
Hmm.
um,
Right.
so
Yeah.
that
Which
I
are.
can track my work. See, they're not just tracking a quote; they're tracking their own effort. How much time do I have to put into this right now,
Right.
and which one am I prioritizing
Yeah.
to go to next? So
Yeah.
I yeah, I don't know if, especially like the durations.
Yeah.
I haven't seen anyone ever use the duration or.
Yeah. The dates actually are not shown.
Yeah, so I'm not sure those have a lot of value. Not not that they don't have value, but in the way it's currently designed, um, I'm not sure they're finding it useful. So it'd be good to get direction again from the customer on,
Right.
what would
Right.
they like to see there? Maybe we want to just have actuals in there, but add other actuals, right? Right now it just says actual end date for each step. Do we want to get to another layer of milestones below that? Do we want to be able to break it down by child quote and, okay, we have a partial vendor response. Which vendors haven't responded? If I could see that on this page that easily, that'd be great.
Right.
But I can't really do that very well here. I'd have
Right.
to go in and to another page and then check and see which vendors responded. So,
Right.
so if you think
Yeah.
about what are the triggers for the quote manager to, okay, do I have everything I need? Who do I need to follow up with? And how much time is left, right?
Right. That would be
So,
useful.
maybe more
Yeah.
information, maybe a drop down under certain statuses after sent to vendor that show the child quotes in
Right.
by vendor.
Right. So what you mean is, if, for example, as a quote manager, if I'm handling say 8 to 10 quotes in a month or something, I would like to see in what bucket is probably a quote and what phase these are in. If they are very closer to actually getting responses or being closed, or or it's not verified as yet, I would like to know, okay, these are my priority tasks. So some sort of buckets where all of these codes are distributed as a priority to be seen.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Okay.
let's say I have 3 or 4 quotes that are in some pending status, right? Maybe
Yes.
one is, well, I'm waiting for information from the engineer before I send it to the vendor. Maybe another one is, I still need to figure out one more, the other vendor I have to send it to. That person's not added to the portal yet, so I need to get
Right.
that done.
Right.
Um, and then others, I've sent it to the vendor, but I've received only one response. Who do I need to follow up with?
Right.
Um, I think
Yes.
those are the kind of questions they're going to ask in terms of figuring out what they have to focus on.
Right.
Who do they have to chase?
Correct. Correct. Sure. Uh, and what do you think about the notifications right now? You're not sure if there are there is a notification implementation done quite a bit, but that could really be useful. I mean, that's what we kind of heard from few
Yeah,
customers. So that could really be useful for them to get an indication what's ready and what's not.
yeah. Right now, the the communication is kind of one way, right, from the quote manager to the vendor.
Right.
So, and I think there's already, you know, um, enhancements in for this, but to basically make sure that we have a way for the vendor to not just respond, but for the customer to know that they responded and be able to quickly and easily see that response.
Response. Yes.
Basically two-way communication there, but also for the ability to send a notification or a question to, well, the vendors want to be able to send questions. I'm not so sure that the customers really want them to do that, because you could get into a cycle that, they're trying to sell something. So the customers aren't trying to get into a sales conversation about this. They want to quote. Tell
Right.
me your best number, tell me your best time frame. Can you do
Yes.
this technically?
Right.
Um, we know the vendor's going to get around that and try to sell them and send them emails. That's fine. But in the system, we don't want it muddied up with that. So finding the right balance of allowing good communication, but not creating this overly easy communication for the vendor to make it too noisy.
Right. Right.
Um, But the other thing is for the requisition person, for the quote manager to be able to notify them, hey, I've got all my vendor responses back.
Right.
I'm ready to review this with you.
Mm.
Here's the link to see it.
That's true.
You don't want
Yes.
that triggered automatically. You want I think the quote manager to trigger that manually to say, okay, because they may have gotten everything back, but they might still have questions.
Right.
So you want them to say, okay, it's time to engage with that person and have that be a choice.
Yes. That's right.
And then, of course, you're going to want two-way communication there.
Yes.
So I
Right.
know we're not trying to create an email
Yeah.
emulator here. So it's a balancing act how much
Yeah.
you want to be very careful about sending a notification but not creating all these emails and attachments
Right. Right.
that become a little
So
excessive.
yeah. So because a lot of it also happens offline, so we are not sure. They would rather have something which is formal for few people, but they should still be able to record certain feedback through offline modes and add it before submitting a code. So that
Yeah,
tracking should be there. So, yeah. Okay.
yeah. I think the notifications should be basically tied to the milestone
Right.
that, okay, we have all the vendor responses back. I accept that we have all the vendor response back, and I'm going close to vendor. That's the point where you're going to engage in your
Right.
review and decision. So that's where you would bring in someone else or notify them.
Right. Right. Yeah, that could really ease a lot of workload as well as effort, especially for instance, if all the vendors have responded, I would rather get a notification and go ahead and just get over with the code rather than search for that and then take more time. Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So when working on the e-learning or modules or the training implementations, did you feel certain aspects were complex to you in terms of the UI, or certain things could get a little easier, or probably you came across some instances from after instructing or probably interacting with people where they give you feedback? Do you think some aspects?
Yeah, basically the flow from when after the quote is created, and then um, you have the quotes, excuse me, quote summary,
Mm,
review, questions, communication. It doesn't feel like a natural flow to go from one. It's not. It doesn't feel like a step-by-step process, I guess is what I'm
right,
saying.
right,
And that's what you want. Is you want the quote manager to know, okay, I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do that, then I need to hear. I send this to the vendor, then the vendor's going to get back, then I review. You know, we know these steps, and the training I've developed is based on those steps. But if I were to visually just look at the portal,
yeah,
other than the quote tracking that states those steps, I can't go to that step somewhere. I have to know where I have to go for that information. So
yeah,
I have to know that, oh, if I want to review this, I'm going to go down and now click into a child quote. And that's where I can review the responses from the vendor. And but if I want to award it, I can award it from either here, or I can award it from um, the cost comparison tab. Why can we do that in two different places? That's a little
yeah.
um,
It switches, the tab switch somehow automatically, and
yeah, and so it
yeah,
bounces around a little bit, and
yeah,
so I had to look at it from a different way. I wasn't looking at it from why doesn't this work right? I just, to develop the training, I'm developing it as, oh, this is simple. You just do it this way, and I make it look like it's supposed to be this way.
right,
But yeah, it feels disjointed and not in an intuitive order when you
right,
are working in the different tabs.
right,
Um, I would like to see, if you have these tabs, basically you move from left to right, step one, step two, step three.
Right.
It's linear. There's no
Right.
real back and forth here. Once the quote is created, you're
Right.
going to go through a pretty well-defined set of steps.
Right.
So the UI should represent that.
Right. Right.
Now, the
So,
other piece, and this is where we're missing a lot, is we don't have any reporting here at all. No
right.
useful reporting about um, how many, how much, kind of whether we're talking about actual reports or any sort of insight or dashboard views. I understand that's being worked on, so I'm not suggesting no one's working on it, but
Mm,
I haven't seen anything yet.
right.
And I'm not sure who is advising those that are designing it.
Mm,
Um,
right.
so um, I think we definitely want to have that as part of when we're talking about the UX.
Yes.
That experience is going to definitely be related to the reporting. So you have different levels of importance here. You have, okay, what do I need to know just to process this request and get it completed and pushed to an order? That's really all we've been talking about right now. But these quote managers are also going to look at it from a higher level. How many quotes did I do this month? Which
Mm,
vendors did I send it to? Who is the quickest to respond? Who is the slowest to respond? Who gave the highest prices on different services?
right.
There, there's going to be that higher level analysis they're going to want to be able to do once they have data in here. And that's where the reporting and the insights will ultimately need to
Mm,
focus on.
that's right. Sure, sure. That is really important. Yeah, we kind of got that feedback yesterday when we were talking to
Mm,
Tony Bush. He did tell us that they are looking at certain instances or certain times when they want to filter certain information, just get across that information to engineers or other team members, where they would want
yeah.
to just filter by certain services, look at which vendors are fulfilling those services, which responded, for what cost, which vendor is suitable. So they wanted those kind of permutations and generate simple reports, but uh, uh, fast reports, and the way they want. I mean, they would be able to control what report they want.
Mm,
So that was an input, and definitely what you gave us in terms of input was very useful. That it has to be a linear process. At least the high level steps should be linear, because there's more interaction within each step, where you're comparing cost, technical specifications and things again, as well as adding questions and things. So yeah, at least the overall workflow needs to be linear and then simpler inside for them to add information. Definitely.
yeah. And I think if I want to step back to the requisition, creating the requisition portion,
Yeah.
I observed when working with Dell that they had what looked like a pretty standardized form, Excel form, that they
Mm,
capture the different options that they're looking to get quotes on.
mm,
So, I need to install an internet circuit that's at least 100 megs,
mm,
all right? And it has to have this technical requirement. But then they're going to ask for, well, I also want to see that for 300 and 500 megs, because sometimes that's going to be more, I might have growth here. And if the price is good, I'll order it now,
mm,
right? So they want to have those options. And then in addition, for those three options, they might want to have it for 24-month term
mm,
contract and give me a quote for 36-month
mm.
or 12-month. So those same three options are now times three.
Right.
So it's actually 9 options that they want to get a response from the vendors on. If you
Right.
have to manually create those, or even when you're doing the copy and update, that's a little bit clunky.
Mm,
And that's where I
right.
was saying earlier, upload, download. If you could download a template,
Mm,
input that information in an Excel sheet, upload it to your requisition, and then create the requisition from that,
mm,
that would be a better user experience. And they're very used to that kind of process with other systems. certainly that's the way they've been working with the vendors all along, is just using that spreadsheet and sending it via email.
Right.
So if we feel that's a fairly standardized type of format, and I think it pretty much is, because it's driven by what the vendors need as well as what the customer wants. And I think it's pretty common to say, I want to look at different bandwidths, I want to look at different time frames for install, and I want to look at different contract terms. You know, that's going to be the same across customers, at least as in terms of possible options. So the ability to upload and download a template, upload the options, and then still be able to edit them later on for the quote manager. I think that would be very valuable. And then if you use that same template as a way of pulling a report out after the vendor responds, now you have a common framework to show that cost response back to the engineer again.
Right.
Right?
Right. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So that could be really useful from a very practical scenario perspective. Yeah, where they want to actually ask services on various parameters or capacities. So it's all about probably expanding or making that piece of workflow or UI much more intuitive, where they could add these multiple parameters like they do in spreadsheet. So yes, got that. Currently, they still have a very kind of a linear and a single form where they add a particular information. But if they want certain combinations, they should be able to do that, see some kind of report before it goes to the vendors and then send it across. And vendors could probably fill that in a template or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And you
So
know,
that
you
would be
know, our
useful.
users here are technology-wise, they may be building some of the most advanced equipment on earth in their business, but they're probably about 4 or 5 years behind in use as a user in terms of technology, right? So the cloud-based stuff is really new to them still. You know,
Right.
they know Excel. Excel is their entire world for many of these people. It's the only
Yes.
way they know how to communicate to others. So it's leveraging that is always useful as an input or export or transition point.
That's right. That's right.
And the people that need to manage, well, the cloud is much more functional for managing and maintaining the history and the record and the workflow.
Right. Right. More of a reporting and approval kind of a
Yeah.
workflow. Sure. Okay. Uh, those are really helpful inputs actually. Those give us very new and unique insights, which is very useful. So I think that's the information we would need for now. And that is really helpful of you. A lot of useful information. And we really appreciate your time and input here. Thank
My
you so
pleasure.
much.
Looking forward to the results.
Sure. Same here. Thank you so much, Robert.
All right, thank you. Have a great rest of the day. Be well, be safe.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Same to you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Mike.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Robert.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Take care. Bye.